I can say that there are way more than 6 ways that alcohol wreaks havoc on the body and causes nutrient deficiencies. So I could talk for hours about this. So I'll try to limit it down. One way to understand it is something that Dr. Umhau talks about, which is the gut, liver, brain axis. And so that's basically the idea that when you are drinking, you cause inflammation in the gut and dysbiosis, which is the wrong proportion of good bacteria and bad bacteria. The bad bacteria tend to take over. Sometimes you have candida even, which can, research shows, might even control your brain, lead you towards sugar. We can have cravings for alcohol. In part, they linger because alcohol is one of the most efficiently and quickly absorbed sources of energy. Now, it's toxic false energy, but it absorbs really quickly through the stomach. And so when you cut that out, you start craving sugar instead of alcohol because it's the second most efficiently absorbed thing. And alcohol is a highly refined sugar. So that's why, like, I had a 2 liter, no, it's probably 1.5 liter soda per day habit while I was in inpatient rehab. And I didn't understand it. Like, I was the guy that never ordered dessert, and I felt superior about that decision. I'd be sitting there with my triple scotch saying, I don't eat desserts. Desserts are for soft people.
Same.
Yeah. And then as soon as I quit, I'm like, why am I drinking soda? And I want an ice cream sundae. It didn't make any sense. And there could have been some candida overgrowth. Fortunately, I don't think that was a huge deal for me, but I definitely had that substitution effect where once alcohol was out of the picture, sugar was in. And of course, the least appealing things instinctually to someone who's in that state would be like healthy, lean proteins or good fats, right? Because they're absorbed much more slowly. Now, junk food, for some reason, does seem to be appealing. It's like sugar and junk food, which is kind of a disaster. So there's that continued hijacking, for lack of a better term, of your brain to crave things that aren't good for you. And you can put an end to that pretty simply. If someone's listening and they're saying, well, how do I address these complex issues? One of the simplest and best supplements to look at first would be L-glutamine, because L-glutamine is converted to glucose. It's an amino acid. It's converted to glucose in the brain without causing an insulin spike. So the problem with sugar after you quit drinking is that you'll eventually have an insulin spike to reduce the blood sugar, and it will overcorrect. And you'll not just wipe out the sugar, but you'll wipe out the amino acids in your bloodstream, which can then precipitate depression or anxiety because you're deficient in those amino acid precursors for serotonin, dopamine, GABA, et cetera, endorphins. So L-glutamine is a great thing to take, and it can help you end that cycle. Let me go back to the gut, liver, brain axis. So when you have dysbiosis and inflammation in the gut, you then end up with potentially leaky gut. Things go through the gut lining that shouldn't be there. They end up causing inflammation in the liver. And when you have inflammation in the liver, which, by the way, is already taxed because alcohol is a toxin, a lot of people don't know that when you drink, pretty much everything you eat with the alcohol gets turned to fat because the liver goes into like emergency mode. And it says, all right, screw everything else. We need to turn this alcohol into more benign compounds, right? So it turns it in, I think, water, acetic acid, and acetaldehyde. Now, acetaldehyde will actually kill you. It's still not that. It's better than having ethanol floating around in your system. But if you were to drink pure acetaldehyde at a relatively low dose, it would kill you. And so it still has to get out of your system. And there are ways to expedite. There are compounds that have been found that help you get rid of the acetaldehyde. Now, fortunately, most people who have quit drinking days or weeks or months or years ago, they don't have acetaldehyde in their system, but they might have DNA damage from acetaldehyde or from ethanol even, because alcohol damages every cell in your body. And actually, it's been linked to at least 7 different cancers. And that list, I would say, is probably going to grow over time. So, similar to, putting on some toxic sunscreen and sitting in the sun for 10 hours, you're causing inflammation and problems that could stay with you for years or decades, which I think is another reason to try to rejuvenate yourself with the compounds that we evolved with for millions of years. Because if you have that inflammation and exposure and potentially DNA damage, then you don't also want to have deficiencies in the nutrients required for cellular renewal and repair for the rest of your life. It's just a bad situation. So going back to the liver, you end up with inflammation there. Inflammatory cytokines get produced, which have been shown in studies to at least inhibit serotonin in the brain. And serotonin is important because you need healthy levels of serotonin to not be depressed and to feel relaxed and confident. And that's just one of them. I mean, for all I know, it could also inhibit GABA or dopamine. And so that's just a very basic picture of the damage that alcohol does and some of the deficiencies that it creates. But there are a bunch of different layers of it. So like there's the immediate deficiencies because alcohol is a diuretic and it flushes out vitamins and minerals, especially water-soluble ones from your system. But then there are the lingering issues, caused by chronic imbalances of neurotransmitters, caused by more systemic damage maybe to the endocrine system. So a lot of men who I've coached have like low testosterone a lot earlier than they should. I myself, I've taken things like fenugreek. I've tried things like tribulus terrestris. And I'm not opposed to eventually one day doing something like testosterone replacement therapy if I notice a sudden drop in testosterone. So I try to monitor that because I've had a lot of friends and clients who have noticed endocrine system disruption even years after they quit. It's also really common with drugs. And most of the people with the most severe cases are like multi-drug users who also had an alcohol addiction. So I think maybe that's one reason I kind of avoided that problem so far, but that's something else to think about. And then there's also, as far as the brain is concerned, brain scans show that people who drink for extended periods of time have a brain that's shrunk. And so there are many reasons for that. Dehydration is one in the short term, but also the gray matter decreases. And so I think we discussed this maybe the last time we talked, but taking omega-3s, high dose omega-3s and eating more fish can help to increase that gray matter over time because the brain loves omega-3s. That's kind of the building blocks for it. We used to think that only kids had neuroplasticity. In other words, their brains were able to remold according to new experiences and rewire easily. It turns out adults have neuroplasticity as well. And so there's a lot of hope, I think. And I've had a lot of clients and course members who are in their 60s or 70s or later who have experienced, and I don't have the brain scans to prove it, but just from their sense of well-being at baseline when they came in, and then 6 months or a year later, have experienced a total renaissance in their sense of well-being and the things that they're interested in. And you can tell that they have new neural pathways. They're using new language. They have new frames through which they view alcohol and themselves. They have a renewed sense of self-efficacy and self-esteem and relationships with other people. So I think everything's connected, from the gut to the liver, to the brain, to the relationships, to the fun things we do, to the fulfillment that we pursue. And it's really impossible to, you can focus on one thing at a time, but that's why I talk in terms of what I call the hierarchy of recovery, the biochemical, psychological, social, and spiritual pillars. And I didn't invent that concept, but I have for anyone who's interested on fitrecovery.com and other places, maybe in some blog articles, I have an infographic that shows that little pyramid there.